Wyoming Territory, June 1879. The rain came down hard over the empty dirt road leading into the town of Blue Hollow, washing dust into slow-moving rivulets. Mark Rowlen had just stepped out of the livery stable, brushing mud from his coat when he saw her. She was there alone, collapsed beside a weather-worn hitching post, her white dress soaked through, the hem torn and clinging to her legs. Her veil hung limp, tangled in her hair. Her hands were scraped, her bouquet crushed into the earth. She looked like she had fallen straight out of someone else's story. Mark dropped his saddlebags where he stood. He crossed the muddy street fast, boots splashing, the rain soaking through his shirt. When he reached her, he knelt beside her carefully. Her head was bowed, eyes half-lidded, lips trembling. She was breathing but barely upright. "Madam?" he asked gently, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, pale green, empty. Then they filled with tears. Her voice cracked. "I ran." Mark slid his arms beneath her knees and shoulders and lifted her, surprised by how light she was. She flinched at first, then went still, her hands pressing weakly to his chest like she didn't know what was real anymore. He carried her through the rain to the boarding house across the street. The innkeeper, Mrs. Ketter, gasped at the sight of the soaked bride in his arms. "Get some hot water," Mark said. "Blankets, too." He set the woman down gently on the settee in the front parlor. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, and her fingers shook as she tried to gather the soaked fabric around herself. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lena." "Lena Marlowe." Mark nodded. "I'm Mark Rowlen." He stepped back as Mrs. Ketter returned with a blanket and warm cloths. "You're safe now." Lena's jaw tightened. "I don't know what I am." Mark waited near the fire as Mrs. Ketter helped her change into a dry cotton nightdress and wrapped her in quilts. After a while, Lena lay curled on the couch, staring into the flames. Her damp hair clung to her face. The rain kept falling outside. "Did someone hurt you?" Mark asked quietly. "I was meant to marry a man named Ellis Baird today," she said. "My father arranged it. I never even wanted to look at him. He has land, cattle, and no soul." She looked at Mark, her voice shaking. "I ran from the chapel. I ran until I could not feel my legs. I thought I could get away before anyone noticed. Then the rain started." Mark crouched near her, meeting her eyes. "You did the right thing." Her breath caught, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I do not even know where I am." "Blue Hollow, about 50 miles west of Rawlins. You are far from whoever tried to take your choice from you." "I do not have anyone now," Lena said. "Not anymore." Mark stood slowly. "You do now." She watched him, searching his face like she was waiting for him to take it back. But he just turned toward Mrs. Ketter and said, "She stays here. I will cover the cost." Lena sat up. "You do not know me." Mark met her eyes. "No, but I know what it means to be left standing in the rain." He left her there by the fire, knowing she needed space, but also knowing something in him had shifted. He had come to Blue Hollow to buy supplies and move on. But now he did not want to move on. The next morning, Lena was sitting at the edge of the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky clear. Mark brought her a plate of eggs and cornbread and sat beside her. She smiled faintly, her eyes still shadowed but steadier. "I thought you might have gone," she said. "I did not feel like riding out just yet." She looked down at her hands. "You do not owe me anything. I am not doing this because I owe you." Lena set the plate aside. "My mother passed 3 winters ago. My father changed after. Got meaner. Thought marrying me off would be easier than letting me stay. I have no brothers, no sisters, just me." Mark nodded. I lost my folks to fever when I was 16. Been on my own since. They were quiet a moment. I do not know where to go, she said softly. You could stay here. Work at the mercantile or the schoolhouse. Blue Hollow is not a bad place to start over. She looked at him. Why are you helping me? He leaned his arms on his knees. Because you were left standing alone, and I know what that looks like. And maybe because something about you makes me want to stay. Lena's eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears away. You make it sound simple. It is. She gave a tiny laugh. I do not even have shoes. I will get you a pair. They sat together on the porch until the sun broke through clean and warm. Lena closed her eyes and tilted her face toward it. Mark watched her, the sight of her bathed in sunlight stirring something deep in him. By the end of the week, she had found work cleaning rooms at the boarding house. She wore a borrowed dress and tied her hair back with a ribbon Mrs. Ketter gave her. The town looked at her sideways at first, but Mark stayed nearby, and no one asked too many questions. One afternoon, as they walked back from the general store, Lena suddenly stopped. Mark, she said. He turned. What is it? She looked up at him, her voice quiet but sure. You were the first person who ever asked if I was all right. Not what I could give. Not who I belonged to. Just me. Mark stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You do not have to belong to anyone. She nodded. But I would not mind belonging somewhere. With someone. If it was my choice. His hand slid into hers. Then choose. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. I choose you. Mark leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Lena tilted her face up and met him halfway. Their kiss was soft, warm, and full of something fragile and new. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I have never kissed anyone before. Mark smiled gently. Then I am glad it was me. She held his hand tighter, her eyes full of something steady this time. Not fear, not sadness, hope. By mid-July, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out full and green, their branches shifting softly in the wind. Mark walked beside Lena down a narrow path behind the boarding house, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth beneath one arm. A quiet Sunday had settled over Blue Hollow, the kind that made every sound feel sharper birdsong. The distant whinny of a horse, the faint clatter of dishes through an open window. Lena wore a faded calico blouse and a skirt Mrs. Ketter had taken in for her, the fabric worn but clean. Her boots were new brown leather, plain and sturdy, and she moved more easily in them now, no longer watching the ground with every step. She held a willow basket on her hip, half filled with creek stones she'd been collecting for the garden bed she was building behind the boarding house. Mark glanced at her. You ever done any shooting? She looked up at him, brows lifted. No. I was taught needlework and waltzing, neither of which helps against a coyote. He gave a short nod and stepped off the path, heading toward a flat stretch of grass where a row of empty tin cans waited atop a fallen log. Figured you ought to learn. Not just for coyotes. She set the basket down and folded her arms. I suppose I'll have to aim for the middle? Mark laid the oilcloth bundle on the ground and unwrapped a Colt Navy revolver. You aim for the chest, center of mass. Always. It's not about glory. It's staying alive. Lena crouched beside him, studying the weapon. How loud is it? Loud enough to wake the sheriff if you're careless. He offered it to her. She hesitated, then took it in both hands, her fingers curling around the grip. The metal was warm from the sun. Mark stepped behind her, careful not to crowd. Stand straight, feet apart, shoulder width, elbows soft. Now breathe. She raised the pistol, arms trembling just slightly. Her jaw was set. Mark raised his voice just enough to be heard above the wind. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be sure. She exhaled and pulled the trigger. The crack echoed across the field, birds lifting from the trees in startled bursts. The nearest can toppled backward off the log. Lena blinked, lowered the pistol, and turned toward him. "I hit it." He gave her a small nod. "You did." A smile broke across her face, quick, sharp, lit from someplace deeper than pride. "Well, that felt better than embroidery." They practiced until the sun fell lower in the sky and Lena's arms grew tired. She handed the pistol back to him and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Her face was flushed, but not from the heat. "Thank you," she said. Mark rewrapped the revolver and slung the bundle under his arm again. "You've got more grit than most men I've met." She walked beside him again, down the slope toward the creek. "I thought I'd feel smaller after all this, but I don't." He looked over at her. "You shouldn't." They reached the water's edge, where Lena stooped to rinse the stones she'd gathered. Mark crouched beside her, watching her fingers as she turned each one over beneath the current. "My mother used to keep a line of flat stones on the windowsill," Lena said quietly. "Said they were good for remembering. I never knew what she meant by that." Mark picked up a smooth, oblong stone and passed it to her. "Maybe it's not about what you remember. Maybe it's who you become when you do." She studied the stone a moment, then slid it into her basket. "I think I'm starting to understand." They walked back as the light turned golden, the wind tugging gently at Lena's sleeves. When they reached the boarding house, Mark paused on the porch steps. Lena turned to him, her expression uncertain. "I've been thinking about the schoolhouse," she said. "They're needing someone come September. I can read and write well enough. And I know my sums." Mark rested his hand on the porch railing. "You'd be good for the children here." "I want to do something that matters," she said. "Not just for me." "That's how you know it does." She looked at him a long moment. "You keep saying the right things." "I only say what I mean." Something passed between them then, unspoken, but steady. Lena stepped closer, the toes of her boots nearly touching his. She reached up and rested her palm lightly against his chest. "I never thought I'd feel safe with a man," she said. "Not like this." Mark covered her hand with his. "You don't have to be afraid of me." "I'm not," she said. "That's what surprises me." He leaned down and kissed her again, slow, deliberate, with both arms wrapping around her waist as she rose onto her toes. There was no rush in it, only the quiet certainty of two people who'd walked through different storms and ended up under the same sky. When they parted, Lena's forehead rested against his. "I want to build something here, something lasting." "You will," he said, "and I'll be right beside you." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch. Lena stepped inside to set her basket down, and Mark followed, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Outside, the town settled into dusk. Inside, something new began to take root. The hills west of Blue Hollow turned golden in August, dry grass whispering in the wind like an old hymn. Mark led his gelding out toward the high ridge where he'd been running a few head of cattle for John Renshaw, a quiet rancher who kept mostly to himself and paid fair. Lena rode beside him on a chestnut mare, her posture cautious but steady, the reins firm in her hands. The sun sat low behind them, casting long, slanted light across the prairie. He'd asked her to come along that morning without saying much, just said it was time she saw the rest of the land she was calling home. She hadn't asked why. At the top of the ridge, he dismounted first, tying his horse to a crooked pine. Lena followed, brushing a loose curl from her cheek as she took in the view, open land rolling clear to the far mountains, streaks of dry creek beds cutting through the earth like veins. "It's strange," she said finally. "How empty it looks, and how full it feels." Mark crouched to check the fence line, running his hand along the wire where it joined the post. You don't forget a place like this once it's under your skin. She walked to stand beside him, her skirt catching the breeze. I used to think I needed stone walls and painted ceilings to feel safe. You still want that? No, she said softly. I want mornings that smell like wood smoke and evenings where the wind dies down just enough to hear your own thoughts. Mark straightened, brushing dust from his hands. You'll have that. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding over the grass. Lena watched it a moment, then turned to him. I was thinking of taking in one of the orphan boys from the mission school, she said. The one who lost his hearing in the spring flood. They say he's sharp with numbers, just needs someone patient. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at her differently, like he was seeing not the woman who'd collapsed in the street weeks ago, but someone already building something bigger than herself. You think he'll be all right in Blue Hollow? He asked. He won't be alone, she said. That's the part that matters. They stood together in quiet, the wind pressing gently at their backs. Below them, the cattle moved slow through the tall grass, heads down, unhurried. Mark reached into his coat pocket and drew out a narrow strip of leather, worn soft with age. A single brass button was stitched into one end. He held it out to her. My mother used that to tie her hair back when she was working the fields, he said. She gave it to me when I left home. Said I'd know when to pass it on. Lena took it in her palm, turning it over carefully. I want you to have it, he said. She didn't speak, just reached up and gathered her hair, knotting it with the leather. Her hands were steady. You sure? She said finally. I've never been more. They rode back as the light cooled into evening, the trail quiet beneath the hooves. At the edge of town, Lena slowed her horse, watching the schoolhouse windows catch the last of the sun. I'll need to learn sign language, she said. For the boy. I saw a book on it once in Cheyenne, Mark said. We'll send for it. She nodded, then looked at him. You keep saying we. We built something together, didn't we? Lena smiled, but it was different now, less a spark and more a steady flame. Yes, I reckon we did. They reached the boarding house just as the lanterns inside were being lit. Mark handed off the reins to the stable boy without a word. Lena rested her hand on the porch rail, then turned back to him. I've been thinking, she said. If someone asks me again what I am, I'll say I'm a woman who chose her life. Mark stepped up beside her. And if they ask who you chose it with? She looked him in the eye. A man who never asked me to be less than I am. He nodded once, then reached for her hand. Come inside. They crossed the threshold together, and this time she didn't look back. September brought wind that carried the scent of drying sage and distant wood smoke. The hills had begun to pale, the last of the summer gold giving way to brittle brown. Lena stood in front of the schoolhouse, the morning sun slanting against her skirt as she swept the porch, her braid tucked neatly beneath a linen kerchief. Inside, the single-room classroom sat quiet, freshly scrubbed and waiting for the children who would arrive in 2 days' time. Mark leaned against the fence across the way, chewing a stalk of grass between his teeth. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his hat sat low to shade his eyes. He watched her work without calling out, patient and content. When she finally noticed him, she set the broom aside and crossed the yard. You've been standing there since the bell tower shadow hit the roofline, she said. I was making sure you didn't fall off the porch trying to hang that flag. His gaze flicked to the corner where a fabric triangle stirred faintly in the breeze. I tied it tight, she said. No wind's going to take it. He tilted his chin. That boy from the mission, he coming today? He'll be here by the evening wagon. She reached into her apron pocket and unfolded a slip of paper. His name's Eli, 9 years old. Writes his numbers better than most grown men. Doesn't speak more than a sound or two, but the sisters say he understands nearly everything. Mark looked at the paper, then at her. You nervous? I've never been responsible for someone who needed me that much, she said. But I'm not afraid of it. He nodded slowly. I built a cot frame last night. It's in the corner room. I was going to ask. She smiled, but it was quiet pride, not surprise. They walked toward the boarding house together, boots crunching over dry earth. A dust devil danced across the field to the west, stirring up straw and bits of broken weed. Lena glanced toward it. Do you ever miss the road? She asked. No, Mark said. Didn't know I was tired of it until I stopped. She tucked her hands into her apron. I keep thinking about the woman I was when I came here. You left her behind, he said. I think she's still with me, Lena replied. But she's not leading anymore. They reached the porch. Mrs. Ketter was stringing beans by the doorway, her hands moving without pause. She looked up once, eyes narrowing slightly at the dust clinging to Lena's hem, but said nothing. Inside, the house smelled of lye soap and dried apples. Lena opened the door to the spare room, taking in the cot against the far wall, the basin and pitcher on the table, the folded quilt at the foot. He'll be warm enough? She asked. Mark stepped in behind her. I built it with pine from the canyon. Kept the knots in the wood. Figured he'd like something that wasn't perfect. She touched the frame gently, fingers trailing over a rough patch. That matters more than I thought it would. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lena turned toward him. I want you to come with me when the wagon arrives, she said. I think it'll help him. I'll be there. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in copper and rose, the freight wagon rolled into town. The driver, a broad man with a wool cap and a slow gait, helped a small boy climb down. Eli's trousers were too short, his boots worn nearly through, but he stood straight, his eyes scanning the faces without flinching. Lena stepped forward and knelt so she wouldn't tower over him. She didn't reach for him. Instead, she pointed to herself. I'm Lena, she said, her voice calm and even. Then she turned slightly, gesturing to Mark. This is Mark. Eli's gaze lingered on each of them in turn. He didn't speak, but he nodded once, sharp and sure. Mark tapped his chest lightly. Safe, he said, not expecting the boy to echo it, just offering the word like a bridge. Eli blinked, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small slate. He scratched something onto it with a stub of chalk and held it out. Lena read the word slowly. Home. She swallowed, then nodded. Yes, this is home. They walked back together, Eli between them, not holding hands but not apart either. At the porch, he paused and looked up at the house, then back at Lena. She crouched again, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeve. You don't owe anyone anything here, she said softly. No pretending. Just be who you are. Eli reached out suddenly and touched the hem of her apron, fingers curling in the fabric. Then he let go and stepped inside. Mark watched Lena as she rose. She didn't look at him right away, just stared into the hallway where the boy had gone. I thought I'd feel overwhelmed, she said. But I feel steady. You've got roots now. She turned to him. And you. I've got you. Lena took his hand. Stay with us tonight. Just for supper. He didn't answer with words. He just followed her inside, where the windows glowed against the dark and footsteps echoed softly down the hall. By late October, frost edged the fence rails each morning and the cottonwoods stood bare, their leaves gathered in rustling piles along the schoolyard fence. Lena rose before first light, lighting the stove and filling the iron kettle with water drawn from the back barrel. The boy Eli still slept soundly in the small cot in the corner room. His arms curled beneath the quilt Lena had sewn from scraps the women of the town had given her. She moved quietly through the kitchen, setting out cornmeal and dried berries for breakfast. Mark had spent the night again, not for the first time, and now stood outside with an axe, splitting wood along the side of the house. His breath rose in short clouds, his shirt collar turned up against the cold. She watched him through the window, her hands still on the edge of the table, and felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest, solid as the earth beneath her feet. Later, after the morning lesson had ended and the children had scattered down the road toward home, Lena sat alone at the schoolhouse desk, sorting through a stack of papers. Eli stayed behind, as he often did, drawing careful shapes in chalk on the slate she'd given him. She glanced over once and saw he had drawn a small house with smoke curling from the chimney and 3 stick figures standing out front. Lena looked toward the doorway. Mark leaned there, his hat in one hand. "You're early," she said. "I finished out at the Renshaw place. Thought I'd walk you both home." She nodded, then turned to Eli. "All right?" she asked, and tapped her chest once, a signal they developed together. Eli nodded and stood, slipping his slate into the satchel he kept on the peg by the door. They walked home together, the boy between them, kicking at the brittle leaves. At the porch, Mark paused before following them inside. "I was thinking about the old post office lot," he said. "The one that burned down 2 winters back." Lena leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. "What about it?" "I've got enough saved to have timber hauled from Rawlins. If I file the right claim, I could build something there." She folded her arms. "You want to start a business?" "No," he looked at her, steady and quiet. "I want to build us a house." She didn't speak at first. The wind stirred the leaves along the walkway, and Eli stood near the step, watching them both. "I was afraid to want that," she said finally. "Afraid if I said it out loud, it might disappear." Mark stepped closer, his voice low. "It won't. I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, and this time, she didn't hesitate. "Then let's do it. Together." That winter, the town watched as Mark worked through snow and wind, raising beams and hammering boards with help from a few willing hands. Lena taught through the cold months, her cheeks pink from the stove heat, Eli beside her every day, quick with numbers and now learning to sign full sentences with his nimble fingers. By March, the house was finished. 2 rooms, a stone hearth, and a low porch that faced west. The floor was pine, the windows deep set, and Lena had chosen the curtain fabric herself, blue calico stitched by hand. She walked through the doorway for the first time with Mark beside her and Eli holding her hand. And when she saw the table set with 3 tin plates and a steaming pot of stew, her throat caught. Mark reached for her hand. "It's not grand. It's ours," she said. That spring, they were married beneath the cottonwood tree that grew just past the schoolhouse, the same one whose shade had cooled them during summer lessons. Mrs. Ketter wept behind her handkerchief, and the children scattered wildflowers along the path Lena walked. She wore a dress dyed pale green with tea and sage, and Mark had shaved for the first time in weeks. He looked at her like she was the first thing he'd ever truly seen. Afterward, they walked home together, not speaking much as the dust stirred beneath their boots. Eli walked ahead, swinging a carved wooden bird Mark had whittled for him, its wings bound with twine. That night, Lena sat beside the fire, her head resting against Mark's shoulder as he read aloud from the newspaper. Eli slept in the next room, the door slightly ajar, the sound of his breathing soft and even. "You think he's happy?" Lena asked. Mark set the paper aside. "He's safe, and he's loved. That's more than most get." She turned her face to his. "And us?" His voice was quiet. "I've never known peace like this." She kissed him then, slow and sure, her hand resting over his heart. The fire crackled low, and outside, the land exhaled into spring. Years passed, and the house stood firm through wind and rain. Lena taught at the schoolhouse until the new teacher arrived from Laramie, a young woman full of ideas and ink-stained fingers. Eli grew tall and strong, his hands always moving, telling stories, explaining things, teasing gently. He helped Mark in the fields and carved animals from leftover wood, gifting them to children who were scared or shy. By the time the cottonwoods turned gold again, Lena and Mark had settled into a rhythm as steady as the land itself. Planting early, harvesting late, and sharing long silences filled with more meaning than words could hold. One evening, as they watched Eli race his wooden cart down the slope near the barn, Lena reached for Mark's hand. "I never imagined this," she said. He squeezed her fingers gently. "Neither did I, but I'm grateful every day that you ran." She smiled. "I didn't just run. I ran toward something. I just didn't know it yet." He pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. "You ran home," and she had. The sky stretched wide above them, and the porch creaked gently beneath their feet. The wind carried the sound of laughter from the field. Their home stood solid behind them. Everything they'd built, each choice, each small kindness had led to this. Love steady as stone. A life fully lived. They never asked for more than that. And they never needed to.